Hey guys, welcome back to our workshop. So this one is going to be on introduction to music composition styles. So mostly instrumental, and we're going to be focusing on composing pop and classical music. So when composing on an instrument, usually we would be looking for either chords or scales. And here are some types of chords that are common in classical music, such as the perfect fourth, the perfect fifth, etc. And on the right picture are some chords that you can play in C major. Here are some types of special scales that you can use called model scales, and Rachmaninoff sometimes uses them in his pieces as well. So in pop songs in general, usually pop songs go with 4 types of chords. Usually, for example, in Play That Song by Train, it can be starting with C major, then A minor, F major, G major, and then that repeats over and over again. And then, for example, in Titanium by Sia, um, maybe it's like D major, A major chord, B major chord, G major chord, and then that repeats over and over again. It's the same thing is also with All of Me by John Legend. So hopefully you guys can hear this. Hopefully I'll show this again, and let's see if you guys can hear this. As you can see, it mostly goes from the E minor chord and then the G major chord, and never repeats throughout the song. So even though the melodies are different, usually the main chords are the same. And in classical music, especially in the classical era, there are several types of classical forms that are used. For example, the sonata, rondo, theme and variations, and the concerto. So let's start with the sonata. So in sonata, especially Beethoven and Mozart, they use the sonata form for their pieces. For example, in the sonata form, there's exposition, development, and recapitulation. So in expositions, there's usually a section A and section B. So section A is like the main key of a song or the piece. And by the way, in pop music, you'll be saying song, and then in classical music, you'll be saying piece. So like a classical piece, for example. So in this case, maybe section A is C minor, maybe section B is like F minor, for example. In development, it's a completely different section. And then in recapitulation, it's a little bit of a repeat of exposition, but even though the main melodies are going to be somewhat similar, it's going to be a little bit different to signalize that it's actually the end of the piece. So for that one, I'm pretty sure that this is an example.
Google Career Certificates provide online training for in-demand jobs. Train for jobs.
So as you can see, the first part of the piece starts with C minor, which is the main key or section A, and section B, I'm pretty sure this one starts somewhere around here. Okay, so this is the start of section B of the exposition, and in development, it's going to be a completely different key. So for example, this one, for this Beethoven sonata, it starts around when it reaches, let's see if we can find that really quick. So this is the development section, and this one is in E minor, and this one continues on. And lastly, in recapitalization, it's basically the same style as the exposition. Sometimes you'll also see that in different keys, they repeat or composers, they write it so that the main melody is sort of, or the main style is sort of repeated. So as you can see in the very beginning, you have this big surprising chord with smaller, quieter chords, and this pattern is repeated somewhere in the middle of the song as well, or the middle of the piece. For example, right here. So that is the introduction of a sonata form. Next is the rondo form. So in rondo form, it's sort of similar to a sonata, except for it's more of ABA style, ABCBA style. And what it stands for is that there's different sections, and usually they're in different keys. So for example, maybe the A section is C minor, and then maybe the B section is in E flat major, for example, and this one continues. So sometimes there's like a C section that has a different key as well. And then sometimes another form of classical music is theme variations. For example, in Twinkle Twinkle Little Stars by Mozart, this one, it has the theme variation. What it means is that they have this main theme or main melody, and then this one varies throughout. So basically, in the variations, they repeat the main melody or theme, except for they add different variations. Maybe, for example, in variation 1, there's going to be chords. Variation 2, there's going to be scales, and so on. I believe there's an example of this Twinkle Twinkle Little Stars somewhere. So as you can see, in that part, she was playing the main melody of Twinkle Twinkle Little Stars. But as she goes on, she's going to be repeating that theme, except for she's going to be adding different types of variations. So as you can see, you can still hear the main theme of Twinkle Twinkle Little Stars, even though she's playing different types of variations. And that's how Mozart composed this piece. So like I mentioned before, variations is a type of technique that you can use in composing. So if you want to compose in this style, what you can do is pick a simple melody, for example, a group of notes in the right hand, maybe the 4 notes of a C major scale. So maybe you're choosing C, F, A, and then E, so that you can repeat that line over and over again. But maybe the second time you play, you might be using chords in the left hand. Then the next time you play it, you can use arpeggios in the left hand, and so on. The next composing technique is waltzes, and one composer that composes waltz a lot is Chopin. So waltzes are mostly in beats of 3. So there's groups of 3 that are have 3 chords. Maybe there's like a bass note and then 2 chords, and that counts as the beat of the waltz. And a lot of people can also dance to it as well. And if I were to show an example, in this picture to the right, there is a thing that I can show is that this is one group of chords, or let's use this other drawing tool. So it's in beats of 3 because you have 3 notes right here, and this is one measure. And this is considered the bass note of the beat, and then these 2 are the chords that go along with it. And this one repeats throughout to give like a sort of dancing feeling. And even though the melodies are going to be different throughout the piece, the pattern of having a bass note and 2 chords is repeated throughout the piece. And if you want to compose in a sort of waltz style, what you can do is also choose maybe one note as the bass and then two chords as part of the second and third beat. So maybe you can do like C and then E and G. So C is the bass and then E and G are the two chords. So like you play C and then you play E, G, E, G. And by the way, if you're playing the piano, you can just like already sort of try to sort of think of something that's similar to this. But if you're on an instrument such as a flute or violin, you could just come up with a melody um, that's just like maybe a couple of notes. Maybe you can start with chords, scales, etc. But if you're on the piano, you can start composing with both hands as well. Maybe you're playing one hand at a time. Maybe you're playing both hands at a time. So some of these techniques, even though they're geared towards the piano, other instruments can also use parts of it, maybe like the right hand parts as a composing mechanism for any piece or song that you want to compose. So here are a brief overview of composers in different types of eras and also other types of styles. So like I mentioned, also Bach is a very good example of the Baroque era. So most of his pieces are single notes, and also single notes played in the right hand and sometimes both the right hand and left hand as well. So what's unique about Bach is that his pieces include having the right hand and left hand be equally important. So sometimes you will hear the melodies in the left hand as well. While a lot of composers do mostly make the left hand the accompaniment, Bach does kind of make sure in most of his pieces that the left hand has an equal part in trying to play the melody. And for counterpoint, that term basically means you have two melody lines, even though they might be different between the two hands, they do have some kind of relationship, which means that they can go together. So they have like a dual melody, like a dual singing of the voices of the right hand and left hand, and that's what makes it sound very complex, but also sound very beautiful. And mostly, if you want to play any kind of Bach piece, I recommend having a strict tempo and also make sure that you're playing with clear, solid fingers to make sure that you bring out the melody line. And I think this is a good example. Adventures are basically you have two voices that are repeated throughout, and you have melodies between the two hands. Okay, so the melody starts right here, and then in the left hand, the melody starts right here. As you can see, these are very similar, the right and left hand. So sort of like the left hand is imitating the right hand, but then playing the melody at a different time. As you can see, the pattern is repeated throughout, even with different types of keys. Now it's starting with a C instead of an F like in the beginning, but as you can see, the pattern still continues. The right hand plays the start of the melody first, and then the left hand chimes in. And the other parts are mostly accompaniment. For example, this part right here is the accompaniment of the right hand. So let's clear out the annotations and okay, moving on. The other composer is or in the classical era. These ones I've actually already mentioned before. Mostly Beethoven is a good example of a classical era composer where basically uses styles like ABCBA, maybe sonata styles, for example. And in lots of classical era pieces, there are specific sections, specific parts, starts and sections. And so if you're playing a classical era piece, I would just play by section and learn sections by section instead of trying to play the whole piece, even though that does apply to all songs that you play. If you want to compose in the Bach style, I would try to choose a melody that works for the right hand and left hand. Maybe the right hand plays a couple notes first, and then the left hand joins in and plays these same notes as well. Or maybe change it up a little bit where the left hand plays a melody that's similar to the right hand, and the left and right hand can work together. If you want to compose in the classical era, I recommend having a few different melodies for each section. So maybe the section A, your melody goes like, to make it simple, in C major, maybe it goes like C, F, G, E. Then maybe in the B section, your key is G major, so then maybe it'll go like G, C, B, A, for example. And then you can do that to make different types of sections. So Chopin, even though most of his pieces are pretty structured, such as having a rigid waltz pattern, if you were to play any of Chopin's songs, or Chopin's pieces, I would recommend having a very flexible tempo, and that's called rubato. And mostly the right hand is the melody, and the left hand is the chords. And sometimes his pieces does have the ABA structure. For example, the A section is like B minor, the B section is B major, for example. So Rachmaninoff style is basically, to make it more simplified, basically a lot of his pieces have like big dramatic chords. It uses the whole piano range. So in the Romantic era, which is where he is from, lots of composers try to compose pieces that involve lots of instruments, for example, lots of violins, to make like a big dramatic piece, and very like sort of like very romantic as well. And Rachmaninoff also sometimes use melodies in the left hand as well. As you can see already, in this part of the piece, the drama is building up, and then I think this is the peak of the entire piece. So as you can see, there's lots of chords, big loud chords in this A section. And then here is where you start to have that very flowing pattern of arpeggios, especially in the left hand. So when I said that sometimes Rachmaninoff does have a little bit of melody in the left hand, if you take a look at the notes that have a line at the top of it, which basically means tenuto, means having an emphasis, you can see that he does have melodies right here in the right hand, but also in accompaniment melody right here too. So all these are considered part of the melody. So basically, even though the left hand is mostly accompaniment, like right here, sometimes Rachmaninoff does have melodies in the left hand as well. So Ravel is considered to be the opposite of Rachmaninoff. He mostly has like single notes, brilliantly like a diamond, like waterfall arpeggios. It's basically when you think of like sparkly diamond, that's kind of like what Ravel's pieces sound like. Prokofiev pieces really usually have like a sharp and clear rhythm, have like lots of chords that need to be emphasized, sort of like marching soldiers or like in a band, and some of them can be pretty dramatic and crazy as well. So if you want to compose in a style like Prokofiev, I do think that his composing style is a little bit harder, as it involves lots of complex techniques, and also he does not play, his pieces are not really in the traditional like C major or F major, for example. His pieces do have sort of like more complex types of key signatures, or more types of keys, or like major and minor keys. So MuseScore I do recommend for an easy way to compose. You can just type on the keyboard for notes that you can play on MuseScore. So if you want to try to not only if you want to learn like the pop song type of composing, if you want to try to recreate it on the piano, what I recommend to do is listen to a pop song on the radio and try to see if you can find the main beats, maybe like the main chords, and to see if you can try to match those melodies and match those chords. So sometimes in pop songs, they do have already piano in the song, so you can like hear for what chords appear. Sometimes there are other instruments, but if you can identify what key it's in, and then like what kind of main chords are used, you could try to emulate that on the piano or another instrument and try to play its melody. And here's some kind of techniques on how to compose like for your first composition. So for starting in C major, let's say you want to compose a C major piece. Um, let's say if you want to compose a C major, you can start with having chords in the left hand. So for example, you can start with the C major chord. Then in this picture, you have the F major and then the G major chord. So as you can see, this is part of the tonic subdominant dominant relationship between all these chords, and these are related to each other because when you go from the different melody notes in the right hand, which you can add on after playing these chords, you can see how they sort of match together. And in classical music, these chords are basically used a lot in compositions, so I would recommend using them as well. And then if you want to make it simple, you can just use simple single notes in the right hand. So I believe this is let's see. I believe this is an example of when I was composing this piece. I basically just used I think I just used the first C major chords in the left hand, and in the right hand, I was basically using single notes to play. So in your first composition, you can try to see if you can take inspiration from these types of styles and see if you can use different chords and notes in your right hand to see what you can play. And if you're playing on an instrument other than the piano, you don't have to worry about the accompaniment too much. You could just like focus on trying to create pleasing melodies. For example, I used in C major, I started with E, G, A, and then G, E. So I basically did E, G, A, G, E, and that's like the first phrase. You try to come up with different melodies like that and try to create it on an instrument. Yeah, so basically, like I mentioned before, you could start with adding your right hand and play any types of notes that you want in your right hand as your left hand plays these chords. And if you get more comfortable, you can start adding other types of chords as well. So overall, this is an introduction to music composition style.